you reading, though, this different mood that we're getting from South Korea side and Japan side on the progress that they're making in tariff negotiations? Because we thought that Japan would be an easier one, but South Korea, it doesn't really have a leadership at the moment.
Fair enough. I mean, it is an interesting split screen, if you will. But, you know, when I talk about split screen, I keep thinking about old crime dramas on television where you have two suspects in different rooms. So Japan is in one room, South Korea is in one room, and whoever cuts the first deal gets the best deal. And I think that's what we might be looking at. So ironically, we could see South Korea inking some kind of deal before Japan. But I think the spoiler is that in South Korea, of course, we have an election coming up in June. And at the moment, you know, even someone like me who's been writing about Korea for a long time, I sometimes have to Google when I'm writing about Korea, who's in charge at the moment. And I think one of the problems the Trump administration will face is that with an election coming up in June, will any trade deal that they strike be ratified in time for the election? And once June 3rd arrives, are all bets off? And so I know that President Trump is racing for a deal. I think also what we're seeing is this week, the Trump administration has really blinked. They claim that they haven't, but when it comes to tariffs on China, on the rest of the world, they may not be lowering tariffs on China just yet, but we can see where this is going. And so can officials in Korea, so can officials in Japan. So I think you will see an effort to throttle things back a little bit and slow walk this process because Trump is desperate for a deal, and China and Korea and Japan can certainly exploit that desperation at this point.
You know, the concern in South Korea, right after the December martial law and impeachment after impeachment, was that South Korea will lose this negotiating power or not even get to negotiate with the Trump administration because of the leadership vacuum. But then again, here we're talking about some meaningful progress and successful talks and so on. Do you think it's the result of the Trump administration needing some kind of a win, show progress, show the world that these tariff negotiations can happen fast enough?
3 words. Yes, 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 absolutely. I mean, I think the Trump administration is increasingly desperate for a deal, any deal. We've seen trillions of dollars of wealth destroyed because of Trump's erraticness. We've seen the extent to which the U.S. is losing allies at a very, very rapid clip. The Trump administration is basically waging a trade war with everyone, not just China. If you want to do a trade war with China, you have to surround China with allies and pressure them from the outside. Trump is doing exactly the opposite, and it's backfiring on him spectacularly. You have J.P. Morgan, you have Goldman Sachs talking about recession, you have former Treasury Secretary stepping to the microphone saying, what are they doing? Trump is desperate for a deal, and South Korea and Japan can see that, and they can exploit that to their benefit. And if I were South Korea, I certainly would talk to the Trump administration, but I would slow walk this as much as possible. Japan, for example, also has an election coming up in July. And if you're Prime Minister Ishiba, why would you be racing for a deal right now when A, the Trump administration is hobbled by its erraticness, but also Trump has approval ratings at 40% at best? Why would you accelerate a deal when you can slow walk this and in many ways get a trade deal that gives Trump a PR win perhaps, but doesn't change a lot on the ground?
Yeah, or, improve Ishiba's ratings. I get you. Willie, listen, always a pleasure seeing you. Thank you for your time. One of the reasons we love having you on the show is because we're just so on the same page. I mean, both of us obviously watch too many cop shows, right? And I love your analogy here, right? Japan and Korea in different rooms, 2 different suspects, and they're trying to work them against each other. I get that. Listen, so let's focus on Japan, if we could. One of the things people have been talking about out of these talks between the U.S. and Japan is possibly, I guess, what would amount to a latter-day or new Plaza Accord. And this was 40 years ago, right? But from, the news flow we've got coming out of D.C. and from Kato himself, it sounds very sort of G7-ish. Let the market set exchange rates, yada, yada. It doesn't sound as though they're anywhere near that kind of accord, which would mean the yen appreciating and the dollar getting even softer.
Well, I think, Martin, you're dating you and I here in this conversation. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're 40 years away from the Plaza Accord. And what's really funny about the Plaza Accord for me is that, of course, it took place in a New York City hotel that Donald Trump once owned. And now he's talking about the Mar-a-Lago Accord. One of the things on the ground here in Japan that's changed quite a bit is the yen is up almost 10% this year. Which for an economy that kind of hobbled into 2025 and is experiencing something like stagflation, that's not nothing. And in many ways, I think that could color trade negotiations to some extent for Japan. I think Japan considers it a win that so far they claim that the yen is off the table. But I really cannot see the Trump administration agreeing to any kind of trade deal with Japan without getting some assurances that the yen would rise. And that's a big problem. I mean, because the Bank of Japan, as we know, has been raising interest rates basically for almost a year now, significantly. And suddenly that's on hold because if the BOJ does continue raising rates, the yen could skyrocket and put Japanese profits, the Japanese economy, the export sector in the year ahead very much in harm's way at a moment when Trump is slapping these massive tariffs on every country left and right. And so the yen question for me really is the interesting microcosm here of the bigger challenge.
Yeah, and Willie, I think there's an irony here because, I mean, does Japan want a firmer yen? Of course they do, right? But they want to do it sort of slowly, progressively by, among other things, let's say, making their industry or their economy more competitive globally. I get that, right? But
Right.
Here, I'm thinking, even if Japan wanted to and wanted to do it as fast as the U.S. would prefer or like, right, their hands are kind of tied, right? If they intervene to try and buy yen, and the last time they did that was, I think, back last year, 2024, right, it would mean they would have to sell the U.S. Treasuries, which is exactly what we don't want to see. Certainly not Besson, right? On the other hand, right, they could do it by, let's say, raising interest rates, but then that would make, Ueda sort of look like Powell under pressure and caving into to the U.S.
Right. I mean, ironically, the Bank of Japan here in Tokyo is often under pressure from Japanese politicians. Right now, it's American politicians. So it's an interesting, again, split screen, if you will. But I think, one of the problems with the Bank of Japan, one reason why this calculus is so difficult, is Trump has made no mystery of the fact that he wants to devalue the dollar, right? Trump has a very Argentina-ish view of exchange rates. And, for the country which protects the reserve currency, it's very unnerving for currency traders everywhere to hear Trump surrogates talking about devaluing the dollar. So if you're Japan, why would you agree to the yen rising 10, 20% at the expense of your export sector at a moment when Trump is increasing tariffs on autos 25%, when you worry about the U.S. stepping forward and weakening the dollar in the way in which Trump claims he's not going to fire Jerome Powell. I don't believe that for a second. And when you see the extent to which Trump is meddling with the dollar, if you're Japan, why would you agree to this? Japan agreed to this in 1985. Arguably, it accelerated the implosion of the bubble economy. And, China's looking at this. And when the U.S. says to China, you should accept a stronger exchange rate, China remembers what happened to Japan after 1985, and they want no part of that. So I think a currency deal between the U.S. and Japan right now is going to be very, very difficult to sell for Tokyo, especially with an election coming up in July when Prime Minister Ishiba's approval ratings are about 26%, which makes Joe Biden in his last month in office look pretty popular.
So are you suggesting that one of these suspects in one of these rooms, Japan may get a deal that is not too bad, that is not too painful from what we had initially thought?
I think so, because I think, Prime Minister Ishiba right now is looking at Shinzo Abe, right? Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister here in Japan, he negotiated the last free trade deal with the Trump 1.0 White House. In 2019, Trump said this is a phenomenal trade deal, for Japan, because basically Japan signed a trade deal that excluded autos, that put pharmaceuticals and financial services, basically pushed it forward to another day. So it was kind of a document that didn't change anything between the two nations. Ishiba is trying to create a similar illusion. And if Ishiba can, basically flatter Trump and give him the PR win, maybe Trump will move on to a different victim. if you will, or a different room to talk to a different suspect.